5 shocking secrets of the witch hunts. They tried to hide. What if I told you that the witch hunts were never just about witches? For centuries, the world has been told that innocent women were burned at the stake for casting spells or whispering curses. But the truth is far darker, more twisted, and far more shocking than the stories you think you know. The witch hunts were not only trials of superstition, they were theaters of fear, weapons of power, and spectacles of blood. Behind the smoke of the pyres and the echoes of tortured screams lie secrets that history has tried to bury, secrets of greed disguised as piety, of politics cloaked in religion, of sins committed in the name of salvation. Imagine a world where a whisper could condemn you, where the accusation of sorcery was enough to end your life, and where those who cried the loudest about sin were themselves consumed by it. This was the reality of the witch hunts. They were less about magic and more about control. In this video, we will uncover 5 shocking secrets of the witch hunts that they tried to hide. From the hidden motives that fueled the persecutions to the unspeakable methods used to extract confessions and the dark legacy that still shadows us today. Stay with me until the end, because once you hear these secrets, you'll never look at the witch hunts the same way again. Secret 1. The witch hunts were fueled by fear, not faith. When people think of the witch hunts, they often imagine a society obsessed with rooting out sorcery and protecting the faithful from the devil's grasp. But beneath the surface, the driving force was not holy devotion, it was fear. Fear became the most powerful weapon of all, shaping how entire communities turned on one another and transforming suspicion into deadly accusation. The late Middle Ages and Renaissance were times of uncertainty. Disease swept across Europe, crops failed, and wars tore villages apart. In moments of desperation, people demanded explanations for their suffering. The church and local authorities found a convenient answer: witches. By labeling someone as an agent of Satan, they gave ordinary people a target for their fear and rage. Instead of questioning corrupt leaders, failed harvests, or social inequality, communities projected their anxieties onto neighbors, widows, or anyone who stood out as different. Fear spread like a plague. A woman who knew too much about herbs, a man who lived alone on the edge of town, even a child who spoke out of turn, anyone could be branded a witch. Once accused, the cycle of terror ensured that few escaped. Those tortured into confessing named others, and entire towns became engulfed in a fever of suspicion. Fear became self-perpetuating, feeding itself as each execution fueled the belief that evil truly lurked everywhere. But perhaps the most chilling truth is this: the witch hunts did not strengthen faith, they hollowed it out. They replaced spiritual trust with paranoia, and turned the church into an institution of control rather than comfort. Fear proved more powerful than belief, and in its shadow, thousands of innocent lives were lost. This first shocking secret reminds us that the witch hunts were never about saving souls. They were about keeping societies bound in chains of terror. And fear, once unleashed, became the deadliest witch of them all. Secret 2. The accusations were weapons of power. Behind every pyre that lit up the night sky was not only fear, but ambition. The witch hunts became a convenient tool for those who sought power, land, or influence. Accusations of witchcraft were rarely random, they were strategic. If a wealthy widow owned land coveted by her neighbors, branding her a witch was enough to seize her property after her execution. If a political rival stood in the way, whispering that he practiced sorcery could destroy his reputation overnight. Even within families, inheritance disputes often ended with one relative condemning another as a servant of the devil. The church, too, used accusations to reinforce its authority. By defining what was heresy and who was guilty of witchcraft, it positioned itself as the ultimate judge of morality. The more people feared witches, the more they depended on the church for protection. And in times of chaos, this control was priceless. This secret exposes a brutal truth. The witch hunts were less about fighting evil and more about exploiting accusation as a weapon. They remind us that in a world ruled by suspicion, words alone could kill. And justice was twisted into an instrument of greed and domination. Secret 3. Torture created the witches. It claimed to expose one of the most disturbing truths of the witch hunts, is that many so-called witches never existed until torture made them real. The confessions that condemned thousands were not the words of free people, but the screams of the broken. When accusations were made, the accused were dragged into dark chambers where torture devices waited. The rack stretched limbs until joints tore. Strapetto wrenched shoulders from their sockets, and thumbscrews crushed bone into dust. Sleep deprivation, starvation, and threats against family members drove people to say anything to make the pain stop. And what the inquisitors wanted to hear was always the same: a pact with the devil, midnight rituals, and the names of other witches. Under such torment, even the innocent invented elaborate stories of flying through the night or feasting at Satan's table. These confessions were then used as proof that witchcraft was real, feeding the hysteria and justifying even more arrests. It was a vicious cycle. The more torture was applied, the more witches were discovered. The most tragic irony is that torture turned fantasy into fact. Authorities pointed to confessions as undeniable evidence, even though they were extracted under duress. Entire communities accepted these falsehoods, believing that Satan's army lurked among them, when in truth it was fear and cruelty that gave the devil his voice. This secret unmasks the witch hunts for what they truly were: a self-fulfilling nightmare. The instruments of pain did not uncover truth, they manufactured it. And in doing so, they condemned thousands of innocents to flames, forever branding them as witches in the pages of history. Secret 4. The witch hunts targeted the vulnerable. Another shocking truth of the witch hunts is that the victims were rarely powerful sorcerers or dangerous heretics. Instead, the hunts preyed on the most vulnerable members of society, the ones least able to defend themselves. Women made up the majority of those accused. Widows without male protectors, healers who worked with herbs, or simply women who lived outside traditional roles were easy targets. In a world dominated by patriarchal power, independence was often mistaken for devilry. To accuse a woman of witchcraft was to silence her voice, strip her of property, and reinforce control over the social order. But it wasn't only women. The poor, the elderly, and even children were dragged into trials. Those who had no wealth to bribe officials, no family to defend them, or no status to resist, were swept into the fire. Marginalized groups became scapegoats, blamed for failed harvests, plagues, or disasters they had no part in causing. In some cases, entire communities turned on outsiders, migrants, wanderers, or anyone who didn't belong, branding them as witches to protect themselves. This pattern reveals a cruel reality. The witch hunts were less about purging evil and more about exploiting weakness. The vulnerable carried the weight of society's fears, while the powerful stood above the flames untouched. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this secret is that the victims' names are mostly lost to history. What remains are numbers, trial records, and fragments of testimony, reminding us that those condemned were not demons, but ordinary people crushed by fear and prejudice. The witch hunts, then, were not a battle against witches at all. They were an assault on the powerless, a warning to anyone who dared step outside the narrow boundaries of society. And in their ashes, we see the darkest face of injustice, when the innocent suffers so that the powerful can maintain control. Secret 5. The legacy of terror still haunts us today. The flames of the witch hunts may have died out centuries ago, but their smoke still lingers in the air we breathe. The final shocking secret is that the terror unleashed during those dark years did not end with the last trial or execution. It left behind a legacy that continues to shape our world. First, the witch hunts created a culture of silence and conformity. People learned that speaking differently, questioning authority, or even standing out too much could lead to deadly consequences. This fear of nonconformity laid the groundwork for later persecutions against heretics, political dissidents, and anyone branded as other. Second, the methods pioneered in the witch hunts became templates for future systems of repression. Forced confessions, show trials, and public executions were tools repeated across history. From religious inquisitions to political purges, the idea that fear could control societies did not die evolved. Third, the stigma attached to women and marginalized groups continued long after the pyres cooled. The image of the witch as dangerous, unruly, and corrupt was used for centuries to justify discrimination and violence. Even today, the word witch carries a shadow of the old accusations, echoing with centuries of prejudice. And finally, the witch hunts left us with an uncomfortable mirror. They remind us that ordinary people, neighbors, friends, even family, can be driven by fear to commit unspeakable acts against one another. The line between justice and persecution, between truth and hysteria, remains fragile. This legacy is the most haunting secret of all, because the witch hunts were not just a nightmare of the past, they are a warning for the present. Whenever fear and suspicion outweigh compassion and reason, the fires of the hunts can be lit again. The witch hunts were not simply tales of superstition or the burning of witches, they were a complex web of fear, power, and cruelty. Through these 5 shocking secrets, we've uncovered a darker truth than the legends suggest. They were fueled not by faith, but by fear. They turned accusations into weapons of greed and control. They created witches through torture, targeted the weak and vulnerable, and left behind a legacy of terror that still echoes in our world today. Together, these secrets reveal that the witch hunts were never truly about eradicating evil. They were about enforcing silence, protecting the powerful, and feeding a system that thrived on suspicion. The victims, stripped of names and dignity, remind us how fragile justice becomes when fear rules. But their stories are not only warnings from the past, they are warnings for us now. Each time fear is used to divide, each time suspicion replaces truth, and each time the powerless are sacrificed for the benefit of the powerful, the spirit of the witch hunts rises again. If this journey into the shadows of history has opened your eyes, I invite you to keep exploring with us. Like this video, share it with those who crave the untold stories of our dark past, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another hidden truth. The fires of history still burn in together. We can step closer to understanding their light and their darkness.